So well done on making it to the last challenge in section 6. In this lecture, we'll be putting together everything that we've covered in this section. So we'll be using maps, location, geocoding, as well as multiple activities. And what we're going to be making is this Memorable Places app, where the user can tap on a list to add a new place, which then zooms to a map, which when we move to a particular location, it zooms in automatically on that location and allows the user to long press on the map to add a marker, let's say in Ipswich, which then gets the first line of that address and then saves it in their list of memorable places. So I've got 2 here. If I tap on one of those, it will then zoom straight into that location. Similarly, if I tap on Hudson's Lane, it zooms straight in on that location as well. So there's 2 new features that you haven't seen before. The first one is that back button. So a little Google search on how to add a back button in your Android app should get you the code for doing that. And the other thing that you haven't seen yet is how to do a long press. So let's just pick a random location there in Kazakhstan. So there we go, we've got the district. So that long press to bring up a marker is something that you haven't done before. But again, a quick Google search for something like how do I do a long press on a map in Android, and you should get the result there. You can see that new one's been added as well. And then if we tap on it, it zooms in nicely to that location. So that's what we're going for. Obviously, if you do come a cropper on any of those issues, particularly the 2 new ones, feel free to watch me do it. But otherwise, best of luck. I hope it goes well. All right, here we go then. So I'm going to start, of course, with a new project. And we'll call it Memorable Places. We're using maps. So to be safe, I'm going to stick with API 21. And now our Google Maps activity is actually going to be our second activity. So I'm going to start with a blank activity for our table. Here we go. All right, so let's start by adding our table, which is going to store the memorable places. So here we go, drag in our list view, just in the normal way. Fantastic. Then we'll set it up in the onCreate method. So this is going to be a list view, and as it's the only one, we're just going to keep it as list view. Cast it to list view and find it by its ID, resources.id.listView. Okay. Then we'll create our array list. So we'll make it final because we're going to use it in a separate class. And it's an array list of strings. And I'm going to call it places. And this is going to be a new array list. Now initially I'm just going to have a single value in here, which is not actually going to be a place at all. It's going to be the option to add a new place. So that's going to be the only one initially. Then we'll create our array adapter, which of course we'll call array adapter, which is a new array adapter using this context and android.r.layout.simple.list item 1. And we're creating it from places. Then we'll set up our list view to use that adapter. Okay, I think just a quick run just to make sure everything's looking okay. So we want to use a new emulator with API 21 and Google Play. I'll actually shut down the old emulator so that we don't have two going at once. And there we go. There's our add a new place. Obviously, when we tap on it, it doesn't do anything yet, but that's fine. So now let's create our second activity, which remember we do using control click or right click on the Java folder and then new activity. This time though, we want to create a Google Maps activity. So it's actually in the Google folder rather than the activity list. So I'm going to change the title to Your Places, but everything else we can leave the same. Here we go. So now we get the familiar page that we need to go to get our developer key. So let's just jump over to our browser, paste that in, and generate in the usual way. Here we go. I want to create a new project. Just creating the project down there. Here we are, all done. So go to credentials, create an API key, and then I'm going to copy that. Okay, back over to Android Studio, and we'll just paste that in there like so. And then I'm going to run the code to transition to the new activity when an item in the table is tapped on. So just as we've done before, list view.set on item click listener, and then we want a new on item click listener. There we go. It's given me the default code straight away. And then we'll create our intent I, which is a new intent. And we'll use the application context. And then this time it's maps activity that we want to jump to. So maps activity dot class. And then we'll put an extra, and that will be, I'll call it location info. And for now, it's just going to be the position. That will change later on, but for now, we'll just use that just to make sure that everything's connected up properly. So to pick up that variable, we create another intent in the maps activity.java, which is going to be the intent which got us here in the first place. And then I'm just going to log location info and I.get. Now this time it's not a string extra, it's going to be an int extra. And whoops, it's location info that we're wanting to get. And for an int extra, we also have to give it a default value. So rather than 0, I'm going to give it a default value of -1 because this is going to pass 0. So I don't really want to give it a default value of 0 because then when it returns 0, we don't know whether that's been successful or not. So then we just need to convert that to a string, which we do using integer.toString. And then it's that we want to convert to a string. And finally, let's not forget to actually run the activity. So start activity with an intent of I. All right, so now we should have more or less the same setup as before, but this time when you tap on the first item in the table that says add a new place, it will jump over to mapsactivity.java, and then it should print the location info, which will just be a 0 in the logs. Let's take a look. Here we go. So add a new place. And there's our map. Fantastic. It's all looking good. Let's just check the logs. In here somewhere. I'll do a quick search of location info. And here we go. So just tapping on add a new place. And there it is. You can just about see it. Before we lose it, location info is 0. Fantastic. So that is being passed and we're getting the map created there. Wonderful. So now let's add an example location. So just before we move on and allow the user to add a location with a long press, I'm going to add that back button feature that I showed you at the beginning. So what I intended you to search for was something like Android add back button to menu bar. Something like that. And in fact, this top result here, you can see I've been to before, is definitely the one that we want. And so if we scroll down, we definitely want an arrow much like that. So that's the code. So we create an action bar variable, which is the action bar on the screen, and then we set display home as up enabled. So you can imagine just about what that means. Up is kind of like back. We're going up the tree, which is essentially back. And here we can see that it looks like the code that he's entered is correct. We just need to add some more code. Okay. So let's start by adding in this code to our app. So this is going to be an onCreate. So we now have the back button. Now what's going on here is that they are going to the parent activity. Now you may remember that option when we created the new activity to give it a parent, but we didn't do that. So one option would be to change that, and another option would be just to change this code to implement the change of activity, just like we do here with an intent. So either way is absolutely fine. Because we know how to do the intent way, I'll show you how to do the other way instead. And what we do is in the Android manifest, we find the data for our maps activity. So there's the main activity. And here's the maps one. So all we need to do is add Android parent activity name, and then we want main activity. There we go. So now we can use this code to actually do the back button. So let's jump over to maps activity.java, and you can see that that code was in on options item selected, which is when an item is clicked on in the menu bar. And I thought we had that, but we don't, so I'm going to copy the whole thing. There we go. We'll just add that in. Okay, and we can hopefully see what's going on here. We've got a switch, which I don't think we've seen before, but really it's just like an if, then, or else statement that we're switching on item get item ID. So this is looking at the item that was tapped on from the menu bar, and in the case that we tapped on that, then finish this process. So that will finish this activity, which by default will go to the parent activity, which is main activity.java. And this then will happen if that's not the case. So the default keyword within a switch is what you do if none of the cases above were matched. So that's the default thing to do, just return the number of the item that was selected or tapped on. So that's one way to do a back button. The other way is to, as I say, just use code like that, and pop it right in here. And that will do the same thing. So let's just check and make sure that our back button now works. Okay, so add a new place. It's looking good. And then back takes us back to that original table. Fabulous. Okay, so now I'm going to add the long press functionality to our map. And again, I'll show you what I expected you to search for. So something like Android add marker to map with long press. Something like that. And with any luck, I think it's this one that we go for. This one is setting up a long click listener on a marker, which is not quite what we want to do. We want to detect a long click on a map and then add a marker. So whatever this guy is doing isn't working, but this is definitely what we want to do. So let's bypass his code and take a look here. That looks perfect. So we're going to take our Google Map and set an on-map long click listener. Makes sense. And then we're going to have this on-map long click method, which returns, it looks like, a lat and long, which presumably is going to be the latitude and the longitude of the point that was tapped on. Fantastic. All right, so let's just copy that. We don't need to create our Google Map because we've already got that. So I'll set this up here, and then let's add in our code here. So of course, instead of GM, we're using mmap. And same here. And we'll add the bitmap description factory. Okay, now we've got a couple of issues there. It doesn't seem to recognize this method or the on-map long click method. So possibly we're missing some necessary classes here. So if we go back to the original code, you can see we've got on-map click listener and on-map long click listener. So let's add on-map long click listener. We don't need the click listener because we're only doing long clicks. So implements and then on-map long click listener. Then we'll add that in. Okay, so now we've lost this error, which is great. I think actually the problem here might be that I've got this in the wrong place. So rather than define it up there, let's define it down in onCreate, or even after the map is set up. After we've got mmap equals and then that map, that would be a sensible place to set the on-click listener or the on-long-click listener. Okay, great, this is looking promising. And then that code, actually, we can run it as is for the moment. And then let's just see if that code is indeed what we want. So here we go, let's add a new place. And then I'm going to do a long press just there. Fantastic. Perfect. You are here. Stack Overflow wins again. Right, so we do want this point, but we also want to be a little bit cleverer with the title. I don't just want to put you are here. I want to use our geocoding skills to get some information about that place. So let's create our geocoder. Just in the way that we've done before, we'll call it geocoder, and it's a new geocoder using get application context and once again the default locale. Then we're going to create a list of addresses. Which we're going to call list addresses. And this is going to be geocoder get from location. And then the location we're going to get from this point variable, which is a lat lung. So we need to break it up into the latitude and the longitude. So we use point.latitude and point.longitude. And again, we only want a single result. Okay, that could fail, so we're going to surround it with try and catch. And we'll do our usual test. If list addresses is not null and list addresses dot size is greater than 0, then all I'm going to get here is the first result. So I'm going to get that using list addresses dot get 0 dot get address line 0. So we're going to want to save this as a string. So I'm going to define the string here, and I'll call it label, and then we'll update it here. And then we'll use label instead of you are here for the title. Oh, and actually, yes, I should define that outside try and catch, so it definitely exists even if the try fails. And what I'm going to do is, in case this does fail, if there isn't a location nearby, for example, I'm going to use a standard format to get the date. And then convert that to a string. So this just gets the current date and time, and then we're converting it to a string. Okay, so let's just take a look at that. We should now find that when we do a long press on our map, it tries to geocode the location, and if it succeeds, it sets that as the title of our new marker. If it doesn't, then it sets the date as the time instead. Okay, so let's add a new place. Let's give it a go. So what do we get as the label there? So Adral Province, fantastic. Let's try one in the UK. Unnamed road, fine. And what happens if we go in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean? Then we get the date, because there's obviously nothing around there. Fantastic, so I like that. You can customize the date if you don't want it to appear exactly like that, but I think that's perfectly fine. A quick Google on how to customize dates in Android will get you plenty of answers. Now, what we really want to do here, as well as adding the marker, is update the places array list from the original mainActivity.java class. Now, in order to do that, we need to be able to access it from both Java files, i.e. from the whole package. Now, we have mentioned this before, but we've never used it in this context. But what we use, the keyword we use for that is static. So instead of making it final, we're going to make it static, which means it will be accessible from anywhere in the package, so anywhere in our app, essentially. Now, we can't create a static variable inside onCreate. We need to do that outside of that. So we're going to create the static variable places just up there, and then we can just edit it there rather than creating it. So now that it's static, we can access it from over here. And for now, let's just add the label to it. And we do that using mainActivity dot and then the variable name. So there it is, places. And then we're going to add to it with label. And also, because we've updated the places array, we need to update the array adapter as well. So we need to make that a static variable so that we can access it from the other activity. And then we don't need to create it there. And then in mapsActivity.java, we access it again. So mainActivity.arrayAdapter this time. and we want that first option there. So notify dataset changed. So that just notifies the array adapter to update because the places array has updated. Okay, so now we should be able to add a new place onto the map, and it will actually appear on the table as well. So here we go. Add a new place. Let's go for somewhere in Sweden this time. There we go. So a quick look. Oh dear, I'm not going to try and pronounce that, but let's go back and we should, there it is. We now see it on our list. Fantastic, and we can actually jump back as well using that. Okay, so we're getting there. We've now got the places labels synchronizing, but we haven't actually got their locations being saved. So let's set up a variable for that. This is going to be static as well, and this is going to be another array list, but this time it's going to be array list of lat lungs, and we'll call it locations. So that's where we're going to save our latitudes and our longitudes, and we're going to add a default one just as we did here for places. So I'm just going to copy that down, and then instead of places we're going to have locations. So it's a new array list, and then we'll add, and this time we want a new lat lung. We're going to create that from a latitude and longitude. Let's just go for 0, 0 because that's the center of the map. Okay, and then we want to update this bit of code so that the location is saved as well. So as before, main activity dot locations dot add, and then we want to add this point variable, which is the location that the user long pressed on. All right, so we're nearly in a position now where the user can have a point long pressed on and then save it. Well, they already can save it, but they can't get it back yet. So that's what we now need to add. So let's set that up here. The important thing here is that we get this number. So I'm going to create a variable within this class, which is going to be an integer, and I'll call it just location. And I'm initially going to set it to be equal to -1. So -1 will be the symbol that we don't have a valid location. So here, instead of logging this number to the console, we're going to set location equal to it instead. Okay, so now that we've got our location, we can zoom our map to it. So we'll do this here in setup map, and we'll do it in the same way that we've done before. So mmap.animate camera, and then we're going to use camera update factory dot new lat lung zoom, and the lat lung zoom, the lat lung is going to be the locations variable. So we're going to get that from main activity dot locations dot get, and then location. Remember, location is the number that we're interested in, that the user has tapped on. And then let's try a zoom level of 10 and see how that looks. And then we can add our marker as well. So using main activity dot get dot locations dot get location to get the actual location, and then the title is going to be main activity dot places dot get location. There we go. Now we only want to do that if location is not equal to -1, and also location is not equal to 0, because with both of those options, 0 means that they want to add a new point, and -1 means that there's some error getting that point. So either way, we don't want to update the zoom or add a marker. Alright, let's give it a try. So we should now be able to add markers and then go back to the list and have the map automatically zoom in and add a marker on the location that we've tapped on. Here we go. So we'll add a new place. Let's have somewhere in Brazil this time. So long press, state of Mato Grosso. Okay. So state of Mato Grosso. If I then tap on that, it should zoom into that and give it at a reasonable zoom level. And indeed, we should have a correct label on there as well. Fantastic. Let's just check. If we then go back and add a new place, we're then back to the full map again, and we're given an option to add a new place. Now this is where I would just want to add our final feature, which is rather than requiring the user to zoom in and out and find their particular place, it's likely that if they're going to add a place, it's where they are right now. So now we're just going to add the final feature, map in on their current location if they're not viewing an existing location. So that's going to be here. All right, so here we go. We'll start at the top. So we've already got implements on map long click listener. We also want to implement location listener. Then we'll import the methods that come with that. There we go. And then we'll set up the variables that we need. So location manager, location manager, and string provider. And then down in onCreate, let's set up the location manager. Cast it to not location listener, but location manager. Get system service, and then get the app context and location service. And sorry, that should be a small L. Then we set up the provider to be location manager .get best provider using a new empty criteria, and we don't want only enabled ones. Okay, and then down here on location changed, I'm going to update that as well to the user location so that there's no confusion with our other location variable. And here we just want to zoom the map to the user's current location. So we can do that using this code here. But instead of using that, we want to use user location. But we're going to need to create a lat lung from that. So user location dot get latitude and user location dot get longitude. There we go, and we'll keep the zoom level at 10. I think that worked out fairly well. Now, of course, we only want to actually do that if they're not an old location, but setting up a new one. So let's change our code so that it starts requesting updates here. So provider 400 milliseconds, 1 meter, and this. And if that's not the case, we want to stop requesting updates. So location manager dot remove updates. This. And we're also going to stop updating the location when they click the back button, because we don't want to be updating the location unnecessarily. And then finally, we will, on resume, start collecting the location, but only if we need to. So I'm just going to copy that into on resume. So we actually want to do it now if one of those is true. So if location is equal to -1 or location is 0, then start requesting location updates. And finally, on pause, we want to stop requesting updates. All right, so fingers crossed. That should now make it so that when we tap on get a new location, we are zoomed to the user's current location. And in fact, it will follow them around as they move around as well, which is a nice feature. And it will enable them to add a new location as they move around. Here we go. So we'll add a new place. Now on our emulator, this is not going to do anything, but obviously on a real device, the location would be updating constantly. So that would then zoom in on where they currently are. If I do a quick geofix, then it does the zoom in there, and I can, let's say, save that location. There we go, as Hudson's Lane, and then back, and there it is, Hudson's Lane. And if I tap on that, then it zooms into that particular location. Fantastic. Now there is one major weakness to our app that you may have noticed, and that is that the locations are only saved as long as the app is actually running. When we stop the app and load it up again, they're all gone. That means they're not particularly memorable as far as this app is concerned. So we need a way of storing that data permanently, and that is exactly what we're going to be looking at in the next section. So well done for getting to the end of section 6. As I say, in section 7, we'll be looking at permanent data storage and a lot of much more advanced Android techniques. See you there.